Welcome to Grove Bites, where each month we look at 3 of the latest Grove books. Grove Books are a charity that produces books of around 10,000 words on a whole variety of subjects relevant to the church and its mission, exploring practical issues and finding out what the Bible has to say about them. And our books are introductions to a topic. They're written by experts, by people who know what they're talking about, and they're also bite-sized. In other words, books you can read in an hour or so, which spark thinking, open up areas, and provide further reading. And there are 3 of us in the Grove Bites team. That's myself, Richard Steele, Alex Guest, and Steve Morris. So, Steve, Alex, how are you both?
Yeah, doing well, actually. Preparing for a digital Easter journey as we approach towards the latter half of Lent. And that's been good fun and lots of reflections about how we are an Easter people, even in lockdown.
Okay, and Steve, what about yourself?
Yes, good. We've decided to open on Easter Day, so we are preparing for that, trying to keep people safe, wondering how it will be. So yeah, busy but good.
And we're going for a kind of hybrid model, some online, some in person. But yes, it's going to be quite interesting going back to church after the gap that we've had. So what have people been reading this month?
This month, I have been reading one of the ethics series, Why the Church Should Care About Housing, and that's written by Bishop Graham Tomlin, Bishop of Kensington, and Dr. Stephen Backhouse. Really fascinating and quite refreshing to read an ethics book that doesn't relate to COVID necessarily, but for a short break.
We come back to COVID next month, but anyway, a short break. And Steve?
I've been reading The Christian Life in Hebrews by Nick Moore. I mean, I thought I'd better kind of do some bit of theology. I'm very good on the fluffy stuff. I'm not quite so good on theology, so I thought I'd check into the theology part of Grove, and I'm glad I did.
Great. And I've been looking at a book on chaplaincy and mission, the Christian ministry and the Church of Ministry in schools. So, Steve, we'll go over to you first. As you said, The Christian Life in Hebrews, Nick Moore, who's a tutor at Cranmer Theological College in Durham. I think it would be fair to say, Steve, it's not the best known or most preached on book in the New Testament, but you were keen to review it. Was it just the theology, or were there other things about Hebrews that attracted you?
But I think I'm always interested in things that are difficult to preach on. And I really, I'm interested in how theologians treat some of those really difficult issues. I can't really remember preaching on Hebrews very much. We tend to kind of concentrate on the gospel in this church, just because we always have. So I wanted to find out more. The more I read, the more kind of perplexed I was, not because it was unclear, but because it kind of really made me realize just why Hebrews is quite so difficult. And I'm glad that I was reminded of that again.
Now, the author, we'll hear him in a moment, talks about it being a Marmite book, and we know that shorthand for love it or hate it. You actually described it as a poison chalice. You know, that you've obviously got some quite interesting thoughts on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing really is about whether you can lose your salvation. And that to me is one of those actually do not pass go parts of my life and my theology. And it does seem to suggest it, right? Now, Nick's really good. He doesn't duck that. What he does is he tries to be a bit more nuanced and explain why it might not be look quite as bad as it looks. But, I'm still left. I'm still left, not just with questions, but if it's a tactic to try and keep you keeping on, then it's a failed one. So I don't know what to do about it. And that's not a bad place to be. That's where I am.
Okay, Alex, what about yourself? You ever preached on Hebrews?
I do probably avoid it as much as possible. I recall preaching once on what's called the Hall of Faith, chapter 11, and I used a box of Cadbury's Heroes. And I just love chocolate, to be fair. I took each of the individual heroes and I described, some of them I don't really like, some of them are useless, and then you have the solid Cadbury's dairy milk. That's the ideal Christian. But at the end of the day, some of us, we go through different stages and have different experiences with our faith, as did all of those who came before us. And what's so worth celebrating in the message of Hebrews is that God collectively scoops us all up and calls us all heroes, exploring some of those difficult journeys that other people have been through, that we ourselves are going through. But through Christ, we're all made equal and made heroes before God. So that was my chocolate sermon.
That sounds a great analogy. Okay, let's hear what the author has to say.
Yeah, I mean, poison chalice is an interesting term. Some people might hear Marmite and think that is a bit like poison. And I guess that was the point of drawing that analogy, that it is a bit of a love-hate relationship with it. I think some of that might be a sense of fear of a book that we don't know because it's so strange. The kind of language, the concepts it's keying into, priesthood and sacrifice, these are all very alien to us in contemporary Western world, certainly. For some people, it might simply be that it's untrodden territory. So we don't, people have never been there because it doesn't come up that often in our lectionary readings for those churches that use lectionaries, or it just kind of drops off the end. We forget about it. We do loads on Paul, we do loads on the Gospels, but like a lot of the Old Testament, Hebrews just kind of drops off. So those might be reasons that people don't spend so much time in Hebrews.
So what do you think? Why is it worth us thinking about it again, maybe, and giving some time to it?
Mm-hmm. I think Hebrews is a book that's hugely relevant to the contemporary age. I mean, I think it's a book that treats some themes that are absolutely central and fundamental to Christian faith. It's a book that's really excited about Jesus. Jesus is at the center. Jesus is the most important one. And the concern of Hebrews is to point us to Jesus, to encourage us to keep going with him. I think in terms of why it might be relevant for us today, Hebrews speaks to a situation where the audience originally were facing tough times. They seemed to be facing some form of persecution. There was outward pressure, but they were also facing doubt, and they were in danger of falling away in their faith. And those two things combined were pressures that I think we can very much identify with today, wherever we find ourselves in, whatever setting. I think people recognize those and relate to them. So in that sense, it keys right into the contemporary age. It actually keys right into a time like this global pandemic, because we hear a lot of talk, both in the church and in secular discourse, about the need for perseverance, about what hope might be like. Those are big themes in Hebrews. And the ultimate response that Hebrews gives to those kind of challenges of the danger of falling away, the temptation of giving up, pressure from outside, feeling sluggish in your faith inside yourself. The basic answer it gives is to paint us an even bigger picture of Jesus. We say, this is what Jesus is like. He is so big, he's so great. He has traveled this path before you. He's made a definitive and lasting and effective atoning sacrifice for you. So it points you to those things as a way of encouraging you to keep on keeping on.
Okay. Steve, anything else you'd like to add about why you think this book is worth reading?
Oh, I think this book is just really interesting because it doesn't dodge the difficulties. And it's a temptation when you're preaching to kind of just pick the bits you like. And what I like about this book, and it's written really clearly, that's another great thing about it, is it just hones in on the parts that are difficult and helps us to think about it. And to me, that's what good theology does. I've always thought theologians are brave because they ask the questions that most people don't ask. And I think this is a brave book, and I'd recommend it to anyone.
Thanks very much. Okay, we'll move to quite a different book now. That's my book, Chaplaincy and Mission, Shaping Christian Presence and Ministry in Schools, and that's by Sarah Watson. Sarah's now ordained, but she's had quite a good stint as a teacher as well, mainly in a Church of England inner city school. So the two of you, either have had much to do with church schools?
I've had a bit of experience through Curacy, but the more interesting experience I've had is since moving in the middle of lockdown. And one of the focuses of that Grove book that we're looking at today is presence. And I've really struggled with how do we access or create a space of presence in lockdown where a lot of the boundaries are blurred. Now we have online services that can be viewed by anyone around the world. So how do I have a consistent presence in schools whilst in lockdown? And that's been something I've really been reflecting on, and I'm still finding it quite difficult actually being able to offer consistent presence during this time.
Steve?
Yeah, I mean, I was a governor at a church school, and I suppose I come at this, and this is just me speaking. I'm not speaking on behalf of the church at all. It's just me, right? I was an atheist for a long, long time, and I used to find it outrageous that church schools could be so selective and that people just cheated. they go to church for a bit, and I have to say that it's just me, please. I still find it outrageous. I would rather be offered it to everyone, regardless of faith, as our gift to people, and then by example in the school, and of course by presence, having a chaplain, we win people round. Because I just think for the 95% of people who aren't interested in church, it's one of those irritants. And I know you say, well, okay, why should people have a right just to walk into this school if they want to? But that's what I feel. But I'm not saying that as a representative of the Church of England. It's what I feel. And so I still remember my atheist days, and there's a lot to be said for the bravery of atheism in some ways. But I'm a Christian, and I would love us to do it without the qualifying.
Yeah. I mean, the interesting thing is that she starts off with in the book saying, actually, there's around 1 million children. Now whether that's those who are just in the area or those who maybe gamed the system a bit to get in, but it is over 1 million children. And so my first question to her was, did she think that the church made enough of that opportunity? And her response was, it's mixed.
What comes to mind for me is that it's the biggest place of engagement that the church has in its community, bigger than any other place. You know, more contact with families through church schools than any other means, including Sunday morning parish worship. So I sort of think if we don't get hold of that and see, actually, you know, mission is about seeing where God is at work and joining in. God is at work in these places. And if we're not seeking to see where we can join in with God's work in those places, I think we're missing a trick.
And obviously you explore possibilities of chaplaincy in particular. That's the theme of your book.
Yeah.
Now, people might have a very traditional model of chaplaincy in their mind. I guess a lot of clergy, it's probably very casual. What sort of model do you believe works really well today?
I think the key thing really is, rather than saying there is a one size fits all model and if you do this, it will work in your school, is one of the things I say in the booklet is context is key. And I think there's a number of questions around that. What is the context that the school is in? What is the situation of the school? But also, you know, your own context, your own situation. You know, have you got 1 hour a week or 1 hour a month to nip into school, or have you got a team of people? So I think the context, both of time, the chaplain, the team of chaplaincy, the school and how it feels about chaplaincy and the leadership support of it, and just the sort of geographical and sociological context of the school shapes chaplaincy. Having said that, I think there are probably two key elements to chaplaincy. One, which just comes up in every single model, is the importance of presence. Mm-hmm. I mean, one of the phrases that was used in the book that I came across in research was the chaplain being a walking sacrament. And I thought that was quite a nice way of putting it. And for some of the people in the school, that will be the only face of Christianity that they see. So I think presence is key. Now, for somebody employed full time, that's going to look quite different to the person that's got an hour a week. But the presence, I think, is an essential core theme that runs through. And also the pastoral aspect. I think there's many other aspects in the teaching aspect, particularly with collective worship. They seem to be key threads that go through any model. But I think, you know, as I say, context is key, would be my phrase around that, really. So
context, she makes a lot about context, and she explores that further in different ways in the book. And I think of myself when I was a curate, what's a few years ago now, we had a very good relationship. The church was literally next door to the school. We did assemblies. But after I'd been doing that for a while, I decided I wanted to do something a bit different. And so I said, is there anything else I can do, you know, to get into school in a different way? And they said, well, we've got a woodwork class. Would you like to help in that? And I found that brilliant, because there was another situation when I was working on local radio as a religious program presenter, and people assumed I was going to walk around in my cassock. And I think children can sometimes assume that vicars live in the church, don't they? I had that. So I wanted to try and break that down. And have you any thoughts, Alex, about how you might be breaking down some of those barriers, building relationships?
Firstly, I think some of my congregation think I live in the church often. I think, yeah, breaking down barriers and context is really important, and kind of feeding off of the back of what both of you have said. So there's a risk of over-clericalizing the role of chaplaincy and mission in schools. You know, yes, we're there as priests or as chaplains, but that can look very different. And I think it is important that it does look different, because for some people, they don't go to church. So seeing somebody in a cassock doesn't mean anything these days. Whereas having somebody who's running a woodwork class or in class next to them, somebody who's having conversations, it stops us from kind of turning this into an office that, you know, comes with a whole load of attachments and this is what's expected of you, and because this is what is expected of the Church of England, and almost then mitigates against that dominance that the Church of England might have over some of the schooling and education context, and that sense of territorialism of, you know, well, we've always had these church schools and so we must run it in this way and we must have a priest doing priestly things, as opposed to, well, let's have a Christian, let's have a chaplain who's doing mission. And that's slightly different to offering priestly ministry in a school.
And Sarah actually also teaches sport, and she's got that side of things. So one of her uniforms, she was saying, was a Nike hoodie. For me, that would be about as bad as wearing a cassock, but maybe we shouldn't go there. So let's maybe move on to our third book for today. So why should the church care about housing? Question mark. You said Graham Tomlin, Bishop of Kensington, Stephen Backhouse, they're both members of the Archbishop of Canterbury's Commission on Housing, Church and Community, is what it's called. And when this report was launched, it gained a significant amount of publicity, discussing how some of the church's land might be used for more affordable housing. So Alex, we've got the report, we've got the book. How do the two relate?
Well, both authors are members of that commission, Archbishop of Canterbury's commission, and they offer a Christological or theological insight as to why we should care about housing. It's, you know, it's completely obvious that there's a housing crisis, but the Church of England, it maybe not so in some areas of the country, but largely it's made up of middle class people, often people who own one or two or possibly more houses, and so it's really hard to kind of get people to see this as a theological issue that is addressed throughout the Bible, the issue of home, and therefore it's not just something that this group or committee is going to work on somewhere else in more deprived areas of the country, but actually a whole shift in sociological and societal change and thoughts that should be pioneered by the church. And so this book offers the kind of the step in, or the doorway into that report and why it's important to us as Christians. Okay, so we're going to hear a clip from the interview now, and you started with quite a challenging question. Is the church in a stable position to offer stability in terms of housing?
Well, I think I'd want to answer that question sort of theologically to begin with, and say that, you know, the church's foundation is always stable. It is the foundation of Jesus Christ. And yes, the church may at one time or another feel less stable than others, but sometimes that may be an illusion. Sometimes it may be a slightly false stability, because we think that stability is based upon our kind of, you know, physical wealth, or our, you know, establishment, you know, our sort of sense of rootedness in a culture, and, you know, we're kind of, you know, we trust in the foundation of a kind of solid church that has lots of money and lots of, you know, status within society. And that seems to be placing our faith in the stability of the church in the wrong place. The stability of the church actually is in Christ. And if you see it that way, then the church is always able to provide stability, even at a time when actually finances, for example, are fairly tight. I mean, one of the outcomes of this report, I think, is, you know, and this goes beyond a little bit the Grove booklet itself, but we wanted to say that the church really ought to be more generous in our use of land, the land that we have, to make it available for affordable housing, which enables people anywhere to have access to a home that is safe and stable and sustainable and so on. And, you know, there's a fear, oh, you know, gosh, COVID has meant we're a bit short of cash, and can we really afford to do this? But that's precisely the point of the church. Do we really believe Jesus when he says, you know, give and it will be given to you? Or actually we say, no, you can't really be true about that. We can't really mean it. We've got to hold on to what we have. Let's hold on to it because things are a bit tight at the moment and we can't afford to be generous. Yeah. This, I think, is a call for the church to be truly generous at a risk following Jesus, by saying we will give, and by giving we expect to see that we will be given unto in a full measure, it poured into our lap, overflowing and everything else. So it's a real spiritual challenge at the heart of this.
It is definitely a challenge. And you speak about generosity and sacrifice. That's something else that comes up in the Grove book. And just drawing back on that image of the parable of the prodigal son and the brother who kind of is envious or a little bit upset and kind of thinking, but I'm entitled to this, and now I'm having to give back, and that reluctance to give back. Do you think that is a reasonable worry for us in the church, that we may become bitter about this idea, this call to generosity and the sacrifice that it requires? Stephen, I wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, because so one of the things you notice in the New Testament, the early Christian imagination, or when they thought about themselves and what to do with what they've had, you notice a really common theme from the Gospels onwards is don't clutch tightly to what is rightfully yours, even when it's rightfully yours, right? So the question is not, this is mine, I deserve it. It's like, yeah, it is yours. You do deserve it. Now what are you going to do with it? And that seems to be the attitude. That's what lies behind turn the other cheek, give an extra cloak, go the extra mile. Like that's what lies behind all these things. And the Apostle Paul, in a lot of his letters, he's not clutching tightly to his identity as a Pharisee or as a Roman citizen or as a leader. Like they're not clutching tightly. They're open-handed with what they've got, right? And so then if you take that into our position now, especially if we're Anglicans, Church of England, just by being born, we've inherited this ancient structure, which has, one of the largest landowners in the country, and a building in every parish and a parish in every county. And we've got all these resources. Now, what are we going to do with them? Are we going to clutch tightly to what is rightfully ours, even though it's rightfully ours? Or are we going to have some open-handed attitude towards what we've got? And I think that's partly where, when we talk about sacrifice, that's partly what we are talking about. It's having a life that's willing to give things up, even though we don't have to.
I found it very interesting, that point about sacrifice, because the church itself has lost quite a lot of income recently. And so here we have this commission saying we need to use our assets for the common good in a way that might actually lose us more money. Is that a bit counterintuitive somehow?
Of course it's counterintuitive, but I think that's exactly what the gospel calls of each and every one of us in every part of our lives, is you go against the grain. And yes, society is telling you do things like this, and this is what society says is good, but this is what the gospel is calling you to. It's to do something radical.
So yes, there's also Bishop Graham talked about risk. The risk isn't always a word we associate with the Church of England. Steve, are you a risky vicar?
Well, I was an entrepreneur, before I was a vicar, and I'm an entrepreneur now, even though, as a vicar. So entrepreneurship takes some level of risk, and it also takes failure. You can't be a good entrepreneur unless you failed a few times and bounce back and learn from it. So, I'm not really, I'm quite conservative in many ways. I'm very conservative about things like safety in the church, but in other ways, I would be a risk taker if I could be. I mean, I love the idea of the gift that we can give. I think that's the one thing when we come out of pandemic that we should start giving. We should start giving with our schools. Anyone can come. We should giving our land away. We've got lots of land. We can't afford to do anything with it. Give our land away, and do that not just as like a dribbling out, but with a really proper campaign that shows this is something we're doing for real. Because we all know the church can't go on as it has been. I absolutely love the Church of England. There's some fantastic people in it. I'm really happy, and we've got this chance, I think, now to, maybe it's risky, maybe it isn't, but a chance to bless our nation as we have been doing, and to do it concertedly, and that really excites me.
And this is going to be a long-term thing, isn't it, Alex? I mean, it was a report, but this is a report that really is going to take a while to work out and what it really means. Yes,
it can't just be a reactive, knee-jerk reaction to okay, there's a crisis, let's patch it up, let's give away a bit of land, because that isn't going to solve the housing crisis. As I say, it takes a whole shift in mentality of what our society represents. But as Steve says, if we really give and we really push, and commit to that generosity in the long term throughout the kind of dangers and the worries and the moments of, oh, I don't know if this is going to work, and we may have just thrown everything at this and I don't know what I'm going to get back. It's not ours to take back. It's God's anyway. And I think that's what I really got from the book is, you don't hold on to what's rightfully yours. Throughout the Bible, what we see is people giving because it belongs to God. And so yeah, a real long-term commitment. I'm really excited to see where it goes. And I'm really pleased that the church is at the forefront of this.
Thanks, Alex. So you've had a little bit of a taste of 3 of these books, all very passionate authors in their own different ways. And so if you want a longer version of each of the interviews, you'll find that too on our Grove Books YouTube channel. There are many more great Grove books applying the Bible to a wide variety of situations in the world and in the church. And they're written by authors who know what they're talking about. Grove Books are bite-sized publications that you can really get your teeth into. So for now, it's goodbye from us.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Hope to see you again soon.